Hi, welcome back to another episode of Keto Naturopaths. I'm Dr. Carl Goldcamp. Today, I have an agenda, and my agenda is to provoke you to actually go out and get some lab work done for all of $36, $37, call it $50. And that will be the Omega panel. And I want you to do this because I want you to get data on yourself, useful data, something you can immediately use to change your state of health for sure. But most people are watching this about fat. And so this is something that will directly affect you and something you can do for yourself. You don't need anybody else to give you permission. Go through your doctor if that's the way you want to do it, but that's just one unnecessary step. Just go do it. I'll show you how to do it, and let's get started. Okay, now you know my agenda. All right, so this is Big Fat Lies about keto and protein sparing modified fast, part 3. So get your Omega panel done. This is where you can get it done. I'm not promoting Ulta Labs. It's what we use, and there's other services you can get this done online. I'm giving you an estimated cost of what this would cost if you went through Ulta Labs. This is our portal, and other people have said, hey, when they do it themselves, it's more expensive. We get nothing out of it, whether you do it yourself or you go through our portal, but I'm giving you a reasonable expectation of what this would cost for you to do and what would be included. And we're going to show you that. So you're not going to have any doubt about what this is about by the end of this video. Okay, so stop using obesity oil on your food and calling it keto. That's just incredibly stupid. And I'm going to show you what I mean about that. Obesity oil will make you fat and it will make you sick. So what the heck is obesity oil? Okay, linoleic acid, otherwise known as omega-6, is hibernation juice, and you'll see why that's called hibernation juice in a second, or as I call it, obesity oil. Hibernation juice is for animals that actually go through hibernation in the sequence of the seasons, right? They hibernate through the winter, they wake up in the spring, they hunt and they get their depending if they're omnivore. So if we're talking about a bear, they eat seeds and fruits and they eat animals, so they're omnivore. And in the fall, they get all the fruits that are out there, the apples, the berries, the whatever's on the ground, the nuts and the seeds. And so they get a lot of omega-6 by the time the fall rolls around. So what does omega-6? Why should you care? Why would that matter? Well, for them, it's hibernation juice. For them, it prepares them for hibernation. You could say it prepares them for insulin resistance and so on and so forth. We can call it that if you want to. But I want to say we're now of that omega-6 and omega-3 side, we're amping up the omega-6, amping up the omega-6. And just that alone, which is a measurable blood work you can get done for yourself, this makes them gain fat. And they want to gain fat in the fall because they're going to be sleeping in the winter for months and they need something to feed them. So it automatically diverts your ability to burn calories and makes it to store fat. So you burn less, fewer calories, and you store more just on that ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. So the more omega-6, the more fat you'll be gaining. So in the course of the life of a bear, we'll call it hibernation juice. It happens only in the fall. It's a natural way. There's fruits out there, there's nuts and there's berries and so on. And that is perfect for them. It gets them ready for that long winter nap. But when you take that seasonality away, we live in North Carolina, we can have papaya, or actually, let's say I lived in Fort Kent, Maine, at the Canadian border. I could have papaya in winter. I could have um, meat year round. So there's no seasonality in terms of my food source anymore. So we don't go through kind of a hibernation as they actually used to, a couple more or less, figuratively for humans. But they would slow down, they'd be inside, and they would get fat in the fall, and they would burn it off in the winter and in the spring. So, okay. Linoleic acid is found in nuts, seeds, legumes. So legumes are soy, it's peanuts, it's a legume, it's peas, which are for the most part ripe in the fall. Fall is the time of year animals bulk for the coming lean times. Linoleic acid is in high concentration, affects the metabolism in such a way that it makes the consumer less able to burn fuel and have a lower temperature. This conserves energy and allows for survival during food scarcity in the winter months while hibernating. So consuming vegetables, otherwise known as nuts, seeds, legume oils, is literally the consumption of concentrated hibernation juice. only the hibernation food scarcity never comes. And bam, the pandemic of the metabolic disease. This is a comment from somebody on YouTube just a couple of YouTubes ago. Casey Brandon, I really appreciate that. And what I got out of that was actually a reframing, which was another great way of looking at your omega 3 to 6 ratio, why that's important. And where does this come from? Remember we were talking about before, it's like, oh, these processed foods, oh, these processed oils. This is true, but you didn't think of it along these lines. It's fattening you up for the hibernation you're never going to have. So if you're never going to have this hibernation, in other words, stop eating and live off your fat, you're going to be obese. And there you go. This is the beginning of the obesity epidemic, really started in the 50s. And I'll show you that too. That's Casey's comment, and I appreciated that. And I just want to say I do read people's comments, and it's helpful. Okay, let's look into it. All right, this is from Virta Health, which is a company that has a mission to turn around turn around diabetes. But it doesn't. It has a financial interest in one direction, and when you have a conflict of interest, you tend not to be as truthful as other points. And so, what happened? I used to follow them a lot, and I saw this video of Dr. Finney had this big jug of canola oil, saying, "Yeah, see, you need fat, you need some canola oil." Why he showed that and not other oils, I asked about, and I said, I think that's wrong. That's not the oil I would put up there. So this is a comparing their oils that they generally recommend. And what it does, it says here's saturated fats, which is a great thing to have in my book. Monounsaturated, which is oleic oil, which is primarily olive oil. Think of olive oil. Olive oil, if you think of oleic oil, otherwise known as omega 9. And polyunsaturated are omega 3s or omega 6s. So this is animal, all the rest, I believe, and animal, all the rest are from vegetable sources. And so they're trying to appeal to the vegetarians as well. But what you need to know is that canola oil, and we have corn? No, there's no corn. We'll get to that. These are very cheap industrial oils. So I posted in their Facebook group, I said, I'm a bit wondering why Dr. Finney did this. And so they answered it. Hi, Carl Goldkamp. Some Virta Health patients opt not to incorporate canola oil into their well-formulated ketogenic plan, and we fully support these patients. For other patients, the price, the availability of monounsaturated fat content of canola oil makes it appealing. So how is canola oil compared to olive oil? You can go on Walmart and you'll see the difference. It is cheaper, but it's not cheaper by a lot. And so I think that's really, they can afford to pay for whatever the services that Virta Health has, and yet they're not going to talk about the omega-6 component and the process component and everything else that goes with canola oil. But anyways, hope this helps. But they also have a point. So the reality is they have a point. People are going to go cheap. And frankly, I don't think that many people are actually doing this, but that's a way to justify the use of canola oil. So for me, that begs a potentially bigger question. When does quality matter? When do you have that conversation? Yes, the world isn't perfect, but at some point you got to say canola oil is bogus and nobody even had this before World War II. So why are we having it now? Where does it serve us? It doesn't serve us, is the answer to that. Okay, so here's a slightly blurry, because I had to make it bigger, image of more common oils. There's butter. What you see is blue is saturated fat, a lot of saturated fat because it comes from milk, a little of the oleic, right? The mono, and very little of the polyunsaturated. That's why we like butter so much. And milk is pretty much the same way, right? Because butter comes from milk. Eggs have nothing to do with dairy, but they're about a third for the most part. And that depends on the kind of eggs. Good eggs are great, bad eggs are bad. Grass-fed is 50%. It's like the others. We talked about this before. Salmon, of course, is going to be high in polyunsaturated, but high in omega-3 polyunsaturated. So that's a big deal. Olive oil. So olive oil is mostly the monounsaturated, which is oleic acid. It's pretty close to avocado oil. They're almost mirror image of each other. They have a little saturated fat, and they have about the same amount. Avocado oil has slightly more polyunsaturated, which is omega-6 for the most part. But you look at, what else? We have corn oil, a lot of omega-6. We have canola oil, a fair amount of omega-6. We've just talked about that. Safflower oil, look at that, 78%. peanuts, which is a legume, and so on. Let's get further into it. Okay, better image. So this is the omega-6 versus omega-3, and this comes from a study down here, the use of dietary linoleic acid for secondary prevention. So what they were doing in this study was replacing, this is from the old school of thinking, replacing saturated fats with polyunsaturated. It's the healthy thing to do, remember? The fear of saturated fats rising your cholesterol, and if your cholesterol goes up, you're going to die of a heart attack or stroke. So we need to change out the saturated fats in our food, put in polyunsaturated, which primarily means omega-6, processed oils, industrial oils, aka industrial oils. And so they are primarily corn, soybean, and canola. So roughly 50% of corn is omega-6. 50% of soybean is omega-6. Less of canola oil, but it's still fairly high in omega-6 relative to what else? So corn and soybean are the vegetable oils. They're pretty much identical. They're interchangeable. They're used in margarine. They're used in, and you'll see in a second. Versus olive oil has not that much. Butter has not that much, and obviously coconut has almost nothing in terms of polyunsaturated. It's all saturated. Good thing, huh? But look at safflower. Safflower is hugely high in polyunsaturated. All right, you saw this last time, but I'm still wanting you to think of omega-6s and omega-3s and how we're dumping in processed fats over here. Right now, we're thinking of linoleic acid. We're dumping it in, dumping it in. It didn't exist before World War II, really, much at all. And just forget about this side. This is totally bogus. We're just going to talk about this side today, okay? All right, corn oil. You see it all over the place. It comes from just the germ of the corn. Obviously, as a corn looks like. This is where you can look at it. These are the brand names we're familiar with. So why is it used? Primarily, it's used because it's cheap, period. That's really the only reason. It's cheap. The fact that they're sort of like finagling it, well, you could do this and you could do that. But this is from Wikipedia, which tends to be corn supportive. This corn oil is extracted from the germ of the corn, makes its use in cooking due to its high smoke point, makes refined canola oil a valuable commercial oil. It's valuable commercial oil primarily because it's cheap. Remember the high fructose corn syrup? Once they had GMO corn and all the pesticides, it increased a lot. And so now it became so bountiful, they just needed to find another market for it. Call it something else, but find another market for it. All right, also a key ingredient in some of the margarines, as I mentioned, corn is generally less expensive than most other types of vegetable oil, not much. Soy and corn, and then canola, they're pretty much neck and neck, canola being the cheapest. I did some podcasts on corn, the most dangerous oil you can use, and from its evolution in Central America to how it was brought back to Europe, the centuries of misuse. It's the cause of pellagra. When Columbus brought this back to Europe, make a long story short, what he didn't bring back was how do you actually treat corn before you cook it? You don't just cook with corn. I mean, you can eat corn on the cob, which is kind of the summertime treat for most people in North America, but how you actually make your tacos and all the wraps that we put our tamales in and so on and so forth. Tortillas in was the word I was looking for. And you don't just smash the corn and make it. You actually have to have a couple days in this very acidic ash lye. And well, anyway, Columbus didn't figure out how to do that. So what's the upshot? For 400 years, it caused pellagra, which is blocking of B vitamins, primarily B6 and B3, which is niacin. And so for 400 years, they had this disease, they called it pellagra, which causes skin and neurology and all these other things, until finally just last century, in the 30s, did they start figuring this out in the United States in the South. Isn't that amazing? Anyways, a couple of podcasts, you might want to look into it if you want to go deeper on this. Okay, canola oil. That's what it looks like at Walmart. There's the industrial oil. Okay, here's soy. Cheap and deadly, same thing. Look at when you'll see it says vegetable oils, they're kind of afraid to call it soy. Soy is a legume, remember? Very high in omega-6. So just turn around the back of the bottle and you will see soybean oil. They don't call it soybean oil, they call it vegetable oil. All right, here's a couple of studies that came out that were subsequently aired on NPR that I thought you'd be interested in because they link into this particular topic. If you think kids are eating mostly junk food, a new study finds you're right. That's probably not a big breakthrough, but this is 2021. So researchers found 67% of calories consumed by children and adolescents in the US came from ultra processed foods in 2018, a jump from 61%. So it went from 61 to 67 from 1999, roughly 20 years. And there's the study. It came out in JAMA in 2021. Okay, so from the article, the greatest increase in calories came from ready to heat meals such as pizza, sandwiches, and hamburgers, rising from 11%, rising to 11% from 2% of calories back in 1999. So that's a five-fold increase. Packaged sweets and treats, such as cakes and ice cream, were runner-up from, they went up to 12% from 10. This widespread reliance on junk food is an increasing public health concern as the obesity rates has been rising steadily among U.S. youth for the past 2 decades. Indeed, a 2019 study by researchers. It's not just salt, sugar, and fat. Study finds ultra-processed foods drives weight gain. An example of one of the study's ultra-processed lunches consists of quesadillas, refried beans, and diet lemonade. Isn't that cool? Diet lemonade, and yet they're still getting fat. Participants on this diet ate an average of 500 calories more per day and gained an average of 2 pounds a week. Over the past 70 years, ultra-processed foods have become dominant in the US. So we're going to look at this. So 70 years puts us back to 1950. Here's yet another one, a book that came out, and he wasn't the one that sort of opened it up. He's the one that sort of found the market and made a good book. So it's called Hooked: Food, Free Will, and How the Food Giants Exploit Our Addiction. Cheap, legal, and everywhere. How food companies get us hooked on junk. And so it says, if you're someone who has turned to snacking on junk food more in the pandemic, you're not alone, et cetera, et cetera. So remember omega-3? What about it? Let's look at it. Did this last time. We're looking at fish. So I'm breaking from processed foods for a second and going into, that's why I keep on going back to whole food sources of protein when I talk about protein sparing modified fast. Whole food sources, whole food sources. Step out of the whole processed food shenanigans. Step out of their ecosystem. Don't spend any money. And it's not just a little. You can't just have a little crack in the morning and you're good for the rest of the day. Okay, it's serious. So here's fish. I arranged them by the highest to the lowest amount of omega-3. And it also correlates with the highest to lowest amount of saturated fat. So they are obviously incredibly good, both for both kinds of fats. So herring, sardines, mackerel, salmon and salmon berries, cod is low and tuna is low. Here's another way. The reason now I'm showing fish again is I want you to see EPA to DHA. So this is called your omega index. When you compare EPA to DHA, is a DHA to an omega index, and that's becoming a vital part of testing everywhere, but also it's part of that lipid panel that I want you to get. Okay. Association between marine, from the ocean, omega-3 fatty acid intake and risk of breast cancer. Long story short, approximately 40% lower risk with higher intake. It's important to think about. What else? We have omega-3 fatty acids in beef, grain-fed that were switched over to grass-fed, they're on the range, fed over to grain-fed, which is usually a month or so before they're slaughtered. So what this shows is that within, here's 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. In 6 months, they've lost all EPA, DHA. They're almost entirely omega-6. So that's too bad. So basically, if you eat grass-fed beef, grass-fed anything, you will have not the seeds, but the grass. You have a whole different kind of fat. Once fall comes and they're munching on the seeds, their omega-6s climb up and their omega-3s drop down. So a 1993 study, the Journal of Animal Science, found that heart-healthy omega-3 and EPA declined by half in just 1 month. So in that month or two before slaughter, and that's how it goes, they come into the stockyards and they're fed grains because they fatten them up. Did you catch that part? They have grains that fattens them up. It's not that they're eating more calories, they're eating more omega-6. That omega-6 is switching them over to get fatter, to burn less energy. That's what happens in the stockyards. Price per pound goes up, they get more money. More recent research shows omega-3s play a crucial role in the prevention of, catch it, atherosclerosis, which is the occlusion of heart arteries, heart attacks, depression, cancer, and arthritis. Low levels of omega-3 consumption have been linked to low serotonin levels, depression, suicide, and Alzheimer's. Do you think over the last year and a half of, we'll call it the pandemic, do you think there's been lower serotonin levels, greater depression, and greater suicide? Can't speak to Alzheimer's, but the first three, it's definite, yes, and documented. So the implications of high dietary omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, they did a study in which they thought, well, we will replace the saturated fats in the diets with omega-6 and have people healthier. It backfired. And it's a terrible study. So increases in the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, characteristics of a Western diet, could potentiate inflammatory processes and consequently predispose or exacerbate many inflammatory diseases. The change in ratio in the increase of polyunsaturated to omega-6 consumption changed the production of important mediators and regulators of inflammation. We'll go into that. So it becomes much more pro-inflammatory. Chronic conditions such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, rheumatoid arthritis, IBD, irritable bowel disease are associated with increased omega-6s and decreased dietary intake of omega-3s. So remember, it happens at the mouth first, right? So in conclusion, the unbalanced dietary consumption of omega-6, the unbalanced consumption of omega-6, grains, seeds, processed oils, are you getting that now? Is detrimental to human health and so impacts the dietary supplementation of with omega-3s to change it. So Journal of Nutrition Metabolism 2012. Okay, here's a blurry but helpful now. The big lies that I've told you about. Here's your omega-3s, your ALA, which is not what we're talking about today, remember? And this is your linoleic acid, which is all your vegetable fats, your seeds and fats and so on. This leads down here. Arachidonic acid comes from meat, and it also has some arachidonic omega-3. Very pro-inflammatory. So if you're down the omega-3, it's very anti-inflammatory. It makes a thing called prostaglandins down here. So they're both called prostaglandins, but these couplets, these types made from omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. Over here is very pro-inflammatory. In fact, the most inflammatory thing that is made in the body is a thing called leukotriene. And that's right over here. There again, another illustration. If you're high in omega-3, if your omega-3 is better than your omega-6, which is where you should be, you're going to have more anti-inflammation, cytokine production. Think of what we heard of cytokine storm over the pandemic. If you have more omega-6s, you're going to have more pro-inflammatory cytokine production. AA is arachidonic acid. Those are all those fancy terms are the prostaglandins I referred to. And with the omega-3s, increase that, you're going to decrease inflammation. So with increased omega-6s, you will increase non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, cardiovascular disease, irritable bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and Alzheimer's disease. It's quite a list. And you change the omega-3, it changes just the opposite. We'll change all that. Okay, omega-3 index, which is the EPA DHA balance. More predictive than cholesterol level. This is June 2018. They're saying measure the balance in anybody's red blood cells is what it comes down to. It's the fat in the red blood cells. Measure that 6-3 in anybody, and you're going to have a better indication of their cardiovascular health than the cholesterol. You kind of knew that anyway, right? We threw out the cholesterol theory of heart disease a couple of videos ago. Okay, here we now are looking again, what you've seen before, EPA to DHA. They're measuring these two in the blood of the red blood cell. Isn't that amazing? In the fat of the red blood cell. These are the ratios. Don't get blinded by all these numbers, but these are all the seeds and nuts oils. And we're going to look at there's your omega-3, linolenic acid, omega-3, and linoleic acid, omega-6s. Both of these come from seeds, oils, and processed oils. So seeds or the oils of seeds. All right, so these are linoleic, the omega-3s. These are the linolenic, omega-3, and linoleic. So here's your 6:3 ratio. The lab is 6:3, 6:3. Let's look at some of these ratios over here, and it does it right over here, 6:3 ratio. The 6:3 ratio, look what's the highest, 419:1. Brazil nuts, high in linoleic acid, 419:1. I'd say that's pretty high. Corn oil, 58:1. Cottonseed oil, 54:1. Grapeseed, very high. Hemp seed is 2.5. Not many people use hemp seed oil. Where are we? We are at palm oil, which is not palm kernel oil, 45:1, and so on. 138. Safflower, 138:1, hugely high in omega-6. What about this is sunflower, 199:1. So know your seed oils and know that they're natural, but they could be creating many problems for you. They are creating many problems for you. Health authorities still mistakenly insist that omega-6 rich oils like soybean, corn, and canola oil are healthier than saturated animal fats such as butter than lard. Oh, give me a break. So there was a study done called the Sydney Diet Heart Study in 2013. What it did was separated participants into two groups. Both groups consumed the same amount of fat and oil. So they're focused on fat and oil of this particular group. It goes on for a while, by the way, too. The first group fats came from vegetable oil sources like safflower and margarine, which is corn, canola, or soy. And the second group was olive oil and butter. So they got olive oil, remember big omega-9 oleic oil, and butter is saturated fat. So that's pretty good. In other words, low on omega-6s and polyunsaturated in general. So everything else in their diets remained the same. Both groups were monitored and evaluated regularly for 7 years. For 7 years. What were the results? The results were the group consuming more vegetable oil had 62% higher rates of death. Not like sore fingers or knee pain, of death during the 7 years eating than the other group that ate less vegetable oil. Put that into perspective. Of the commonly cited diet and lifestyle risk factors, only severe obesity and heavy smoking were more dangerous than consuming seed oils. And that came from what we call the Science Diet Heart Hypothesis, and there's a link for it if you want to go deeper on that. Here we go, back to this particular picture, because they just talked about corn, canola, and is soy on here? Soy is not on this one, but you get to see how they're much higher on their omega-6 polyunsaturated oils. Okay, and so now they're much higher here. Look at all the omega-6 they were getting. These three are the most used, as you know, for vegetable oils. But look up there, safflower, hugely high. Sunflower, hugely high. So you could use any of these, but these are the ones that are most popular, and the corn and the soy account for 85% of all pesticides in the United States, by the way. Canola is mostly from Canada. Okay, vegetable oil as an independent factor. This is from the same study. It's just a graph of that. So increased risk by death by diet factor, lifestyle factors. Severe obesity, heavy smoking. Number 3 was vegetable oil. That's amazing. Only severe obesity and heavy smoking were more dangerous than having vegetable oil. Oh my gosh. It was worse than physical inactivity. It was worse than heavy drinking. It was worse than moderate smoking. It was worse than too much sugar in your diet. It was worse than processed meat, worse than air pollution, and so on. So what I want you to get out of this slide is looking over time, the history of the separation of the omega-6 fatty acids from the omega-3 fatty acids. So they're pretty much constant, right? One was slightly elevated. Omega-6 was slightly elevated more than omega-3. But they were pretty much a straight line through for the last millennia, at least, right? And you can ask, well, how would they do that? That's a whole nother story. And then we find when it comes to about the 1950s, there's this separation. Actually, it started a little before. I just guesstimated the 50% difference between 1900 and 2000. About there, it started separating. I would say that's right around World War II, maybe a little earlier when margarine came out in about the 1920s or 30s. So you can see it started separating omega-6 fatty acids from the corn and the soy and the canola oil started getting more and more a part of our diet, and less fish, less and less whole food processed foods. So that's what's happened over time, and it started about 70 years ago. So that's a good piece of it, a good diagram that came out in 2016 of that study. Okay, so now we go on to the omega-3 index. It's more predictive than cholesterol panel and cholesterol levels. Cholesterol levels have lived in this kind of holy ground for the last 70 years. It was never questioned. And then in the last 5 years, you realize, well, a lot of the research was basically bogus because it was supported by the pharmaceutical company that had a lot to gain by all the drugs they could do to support this thing. So now we're all suspicious. Okay. But anyway, in terms of the real world, you can get a blood test, which everybody can get, which is about the fat from the red blood cells, the omega-3 fatty acid levels. And they showed that they're inversely associated with mortality and the incidence of cardiovascular disease. So what does that mean? That means that your EPA versus DHA, which you've seen, if the EPA is higher and the DHA is lower, that's a good ratio to have. Just about the omega-3s, strictly about the omega-3s. That's nothing to do with the omega-6s. And that came out in 2018, Journal of Clinical Lipidology. Okay, so where does that put us? What's the upshot here? In a world without vegetable oil, we may be 20 pounds lighter, have half the amount of heart disease and cancer, live longer, think clearer, feel better, be happier, and less depressed. And a long list of things we've gotten wrong and need to improve in order to get ourselves out of this chronic disease epidemic. I think reducing vegetable oil consumption is the leading domino. I really loved how that was phrased. It's more articulate than anything I could fabricate at this point. And it's by Jeff Nobbs. I credit him completely with that. And I think it was right on, spot on, as they say in the UK. And here's his blog. Feel free to tune into it. Okay, so this is the illustration I put together and I want burned in your mind about omega-6 and omega-3s. The omega-6 has been so hoofed up, so increased over the years. And why has it been increasing? Strictly because, well, obviously the foods we eat, but we don't eat oils directly. We eat the donuts that are cooked in canola oil. We eat the French fries. We eat the pancakes. We eat all this other stuff, which is primarily carbohydrates soaked in fats, but they're processed oils of margarine, which was corn or soy or canola. So there you go. I mean, I want you to know that this is artificially increased, and that's our issue. And if you want to look at a lab, which we'll get to in just a second, for instance, like now, that you'll see that here's your omega-6 and omega-3 ratio. Look at these numbers. If you want to be down to 1-to-1, perfect. 3-to-1 is great. Anything more, you got something to work on. But the idea is, look, if you're a heavy person and you're looking for data for $35, $6, whatever the cost was, for this price, you get this data on you and you go, wow, I just need to pull back my ratio, drop my omega-6s, increase my omega-3s. It is very straightforward. It's not rocket science. You drop the processed foods. Processed food addiction, separate issue. We'll look into that. But don't let the how get in the way of the what. Okay? Don't let the how get in the way of the what. Just do it. Go to whole food processed meats and chicken and fish, and you're all good. And you're all good. That's where the magic will happen. I swear to it. Your appetite will come around, all these other things. People go, what about this? What about that? I don't want to be stuck on this boring food diet. People who say that, boring food diet. I've never heard any carnivore talk about a boring food diet, or anybody who's dropped their carbs with whole food with unprocessed foods, whole food sourced proteins, ever complain about that. That's a comment that comes from processed food people. It's a comment that comes from people who need to protect a certain interest if they're financially trying to guide people. So what I'm asking you to do is use this number. So this person here, 7.9, too high. They need to drop the omega-6, increase the omega-3. This person here needs to do the same, not as much. This person here, Everybody needs to do the same, but some are hellaciously high. 17.1. We know where we got these numbers. They had sunflower oil in the processed food. They had safflower oil. They had canola, soy, corn. Did I forget something? Throw in almond, throw in coconut, cottonseed oil. That's why it's high. You could not have that ratio if you just ate meat, chicken, and fish and learned how to cook that with spices and herbs and make it to be delicious. Not at all. Even if you threw in all the olive oil in the world, it wouldn't get that high. So now we know these are the people that are so totally involved in the processed food ecosystem that they need a way out. And it's killing them. Absolutely, it's killing them. Okay, let's go on. So there again is the picture of over time omega-6 to omega-3. The bifurcation, the separation of the omega-3 and the omega-6 happened really about 50 years ago. You can argue slightly before margarine and so on and so forth, but this story is documented and sad. All right, so here's the highest omega-6, high inflammation, highest mitochondrial dysfunction, pretty straightforward. Here's that ratio, omega-6, linoleic acid versus omega-3, 17.8, 17.2, 14.2. What's their inflammation? High, high, high. What's their platelet problem? All have a problem, some more severe than others. What's their LDL? All their HDLs are low. What's their insulin? Insulin was all high, 16, 26. So I'm saying that you don't get this very often. Absolutely, you do not get this very often, that there is one factor, if you address this one factor, other things will change. Omega-6, linoleic acid from processed foods, from nuts and seeds, but processed oils that go into processed foods, is the thing. Omega-3 index, more predictive than cholesterol levels. So they're erythrocyte, long chain, omega-3 fatty acid, red blood cells are inversely, you saw that before, and it's just, that's amazing. EPA versus DHA, higher EPA versus DHA. It doesn't mean you need to source for fish oils that have higher EPA versus DHA. You need to drop your omega-6s and then at the same time focus on your omega-3s, which are your fish. Learn to like it. That's how we evolved. And so to not like it and saying, well, make it work for me so it tastes good. I'm sorry. We're not that simplistic anymore. This is the truth. I'll help you get there, and we have to get there as well. And so, yeah, we make some special things, special foods, but it does come down to know what you need to eat and learn how to make it taste good. That's the trick of being healthy. All right, so now we look at the EPA DHA ratio, in essence, is the omega-3 index. We don't find as tight a correlation with problems. These are the people that are the highest of EPA versus DHA. So when you add this, though, when you add this ratio to the omega-6 to 3 index, you have an incredible panel. It tells you two things that are vitally important. Okay, back again at this. This is the image that I want to burn in your mind. This is all processed oils, seed oils, whether you want to call them nuts or seeds and so on and so forth, all the processed seed oils. So now we can name them. Canola oil, soy oil, and corn oil are 90%. After that, it's cottonseed oil, and then it's peanut oil. And after that, you have safflower and you have sunflower. They're a problem. They are a problem. Let's stop saying, well, they're so expensive. We don't want to tell people to address that because they need to focus on just eating what? Fewer carbs and more fat and more protein. Okay, I agree with that. They can do it all at the same time. Just say whole food sources of meat, fish, and chicken. Say that together, whole food sources of meat, fish, chicken. That's the answer. Not like, well, we need to make it a 10-step process. And the first step is, will you please just drop your carbs below, X amount? No, get more focused, be more honest. Here we go. So please get this test. Spend $35. And there is a variation. You go through Ulta Labs, and I'm not asking you to do it. I don't get a penny out of it. It has nothing to do with me. But somebody did point out this price is based on people going through your portal versus the public portal, which is like $15 more. Okay, $50. For $50, change your life, please. And do it at least once a year. $50 to invest in yourself, is that too much? I don't think so. I've given you a place to start. So this is what it covers. I'd love to have 100 people go over this, and we'll have a great conversation about all the results that come up about this, and compare that to what you're actually eating. You are home free. You have a way to completely change your life, whether it's drop weight or not do non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or cardiovascular disease or irritable bowel, et cetera, et cetera. Stop using obesity oil on your food and calling it keto. End part 3. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.